So yeah, I just started that recording. And then at the bottom of your screens, you will see that there is a chat and a Q&A function. Please feel free to drop any comments, questions, thoughts as we go through the session today, which is looking at a piece of research that has just been completed by the Ocean Partnership. That's all from me. I'll hand over to Matt Cameron, the Global Managing Director and founder of LGBT Great, for some opening remarks, and then we'll get kick-started very shortly.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alex. I'm just going to give it another quick minute just to see if anyone else sort of joins. But just to sort of echo sort of Alex's sentiments, we're really excited to have you all on the line today. And you're going to be the first to find out a little bit more about what is actually in the report and some of the data points as well. And certainly we've really enjoyed the process of working on this report with the team at the Ocean Partnership. So hopefully lots of sort of takeaways for today. Now, there are a few ways in which we're sort of hoping that you're going to engage with us today. So you'll notice on the bottom of your screen, there's a little chat function. So you are able to talk to us there, but also ask any questions as well. So you can ask those either sort of privately to the panelists, or you can ask them out in the sort of the public domain as well, whatever you feel comfortable with. And then we've also got the Q&A function as well. You can also ask questions sort of there as well. So do feel free to share any thoughts or questions that you've got. A couple of minutes past the hour now, so I think it sort of makes sense to sort of kick off. I guess just a bit of sort of context. So there'll be some people on the line today that know LGBT Great, which is the organisation that I lead, that focuses on developing a community of financial services organisations and sort of levelling up the diversity, equity and inclusion agenda for LGBT people within the industry. Also, as part of our group, we have a separate brand called the Ocean Partnership. So some of you will be joining from the Ocean Partnership community today. And Ocean is a sort of a niche and specialist recruitment firm that specialises in helping diverse talent to access opportunities within financial services organisations. So we have a lot of focus around a number of different diversity dimensions here, from sort of race, gender, LGBT, disability, etc. So this is kind of the first time that we've really sort of worked on a report together. I guess what we wanted to do with the report was really sort of twofold. We wanted to provide a mechanism in which we could really understand what is it that sort of talent and underrepresented talent is looking for when making a career move. So we looked at a number of different sort of data points around that, and Alex is going to share some of those with you sort of shortly. But what we also wanted to do as well was use it as a bit of a springboard to think about the other work that is needed to increase the sort of consciousness around what different talent is seeking. And to provide some perspective as well and some examples of good practices that we are seeing live and on the ground, from the clients and organisations that Ocean represents. There's definitely been a shift in attracting talent and the expectations of talent following the pandemic and this sort of new environment that we're finding ourselves working in. So I am joined today. So we've got Claire Scott on the line, who's the founder and managing director of the Ocean Partnership, and been in post now for around sort of 10 years, but around 20 years of recruitment experience within the financial services and the investment industry. And then we're also joined by Cara Isaacs, who's on the line as well, who's one of our principal recruiters on the Ocean team and works across a wide portfolio of financial services organisations. And then we've also got Laura Clark on the line as well, who also works closely with Claire and Cara across the same portfolio of client organisations. So what they're hoping to provide to bring to the conversation today is some examples and things that we're hearing live on the ground right now, both from the candidate pool and talent, but also from organisations as well. I do want to invite you to do a little bit of thinking with me. Let's see if we can get this to work. So Alex, at that point, if we could just see if we can run the first poll for today. So you should see a question that comes up in front of you. So do you think your organisation is doing enough to attract talent from underrepresented communities? So do you think that's a yes or a no? I'm just going to give you a few seconds to cast your vote. So do you think your organisation is doing enough to attract talent from underrepresented communities? A few more seconds. I'm going to say, Alex, do you want to give us a quick update on the number of votes that we've got coming through?
Oh, yeah, I was on mute, the scourge of hybrid working. Yeah, so we've got 14 of you responded so far, 66%. So a few outstanding. Please do feel free to cast your votes now, and then we will wrap the poll up in 30 seconds or so.
Brilliant. So do you think your organisation is doing enough to attract talent from underrepresented communities? There's a few more votes that are coming through, but let's have a look, Alex, at what people are thinking. Super. So we can see here the majority of you are saying no, with 57%, followed by 43% that are saying yes. So I think that's quite telling. And I think certainly from the conversations that I'm having at the moment, a number of organisations are really seeking ways, targeted interventions and ways in which they can access underrepresented sort of talent pool. So we are going to be building on that in a bit more detail. Alex, at that point, I'm going to hand over to you just to run through for 10 minutes now the key sort of insights and data from the report and some takeaways, and also to bring in other members of the team as well.
Great, thanks, Matt. I'm just going to reshare my slides here. I suppose, yeah, it's worth sort of providing a bit of additional context here in that, you know, the Ocean Partnership and LGBT Great, our focus is always on trying to collect as much data as we can and being data led in the insights and content that we produce, as this is obviously very important to us. And I'm sure many of you on the call can appreciate in financial services, you know, data is king or queen. And so, you know, our approach for this report here was to try and leverage our connections in the industry, our connections to talent, to try and really understand the impact that COVID has had on decision making, particularly when it comes to taking on new roles, whether that's with a new organization or moving horizontally within your own organization, your current one. And so, you know, as you can see from the subtitle of our report, we essentially, the take home today that we will talk through in more detail and drill down as we go through is that flexibility, well-being, and work-life balance are now the biggest attraction points for talent. Previously, many of you may be thinking, well, was that total benefits? Was that bonus and compensations? Was that, you know, promotion and training? Those are all, of course, still very important. But in the wake of COVID, this idea of flexibility, this idea of hybrid working, this idea of having ownership over your own working practices is coming out as critical. The report is kind of short and snappy, so it's not. I won't belabor too much the points in it today, as you can go and read it yourself. We will share a copy of it with everyone on the call today after the fact. But as you can see, we just summarised our report, the findings, and then offered 5 key questions to consider moving forward. We've got a word here from Claire, who I might come to you, Claire, at the end of today's session to provide a bit of a wrap up. But we have some thoughts and perspectives from Claire, our managing director, here. But firstly, what I wanted to acknowledge is that we ran this survey in the beginning earlier this year, and we had 284 respondents from across financial services at all levels. So we had good representation of age, of race, of gender, and of sexual orientation, as well as seniority within an organization. This was primarily asset management, investment, banking, but we did have some responses from pensions and from some of the broader financial services industry as well. 3 key points I would really highlight in the summary of what we found is that prospective talent is seeking something new. COVID really represented a paradigm shift in how people work, in what people want, forced everyone to reflect on what was important. And so, you know, in seeking something new, in many cases, this is hybrid, this is flexible, this is, there we go, Matt, sorry, just a bit of admin in the background, sorry. And in addition, it's freedom. Talent want the freedom of choice. They want the freedom to do what they want, and they want the freedom for evolution and growth within a business as well, but only in that new updated environment. Thirdly, and in a way most importantly, is that well-being has always been important to talent. We know this, but well-being is now absolutely paramount in decision making when it comes to new hire. And this is something that I think we should all feel empowered as organizations to positively influence, to discuss internally and externally, confidently, and ultimately, you know, when seen together, new opportunities, flexibility and freedom and well-being are all the areas that talent are really finding influence their decision making. As I mentioned before, the total compensation package, the training and opportunities, promotion, travel, now that the world has opened up post-COVID, are all still very important, but these are being not necessarily replaced, but there is a redistribution of importance here in terms of what candidates are thinking. So that's kind of where we sat as a summary, and we have a quote here from Matt, just outlining that freedom, choice, and flexibility are the new operative words. So ensuring that you have visible reflections of these in the job postings that you're having in the communications. So yeah, I think that's essentially where we're at. Just deep diving into this in a little bit more detail. In terms of flexible and remote working, we found that 93% of respondents believe that they and not their employer should choose at the days that they come into the office. I think this is very striking to me, at least, in that during COVID, we all were empowered in a way because of the unique elements of having COVID, not having COVID, being with people that have COVID. We were a lot more flexible in how we were able to work, and we, employees were in many cases more in control than they had ever been. And this level of control is not something everyone can give up easily. And so as we emerge out of COVID, this is retained amongst talent and decision makers when it comes to making roles. They want to be able to choose when they come into the office. So those emails going around of everyone has to be in 5 days, that's fine. And in some cases and in some environments, that is important to still maintain. But talent may be pushed away from that, that lack of agency in deciding when and where they want to be and want to work. Interestingly, 82% of respondents said they would not accept a job where 5 days office attendance was mandatory. I don't know what that makes you think on the call today. Is that something that in your environment, in your offices, is being pushed? What we found was that talent will not look favorably on that demand, and that 38% of respondents would actually like to work from home 100% of the time. And this has a real interesting bearing, I think, on where we seek talent, where we source talent, and in this new hybrid environment where remote working is, more accessible, it does open the doors to a wider pool of talent, and in doing so, a wider pool of underrepresented talent. So, having this understanding that there is talent out there that want to work remotely, and reflecting on whether hybrid models are built into your job postings from the beginning, from the start, and intentionally, can have a very positive impact on the type of talent you're able to reach and the attractiveness of your organization. Finally, we've all seen that the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday being the days in the office, and we found that 23% would like to work in that model, and that there were kind of quite a lot of push for completely remote versus in the office. So hybrid is here to stay, as in going anywhere. Matt, team, is there anything you wanted to add here just on hybrid working? We're all working actually in the office today, unusually, but we are a hybrid team. So I suppose any reflections on hybrid and in your conversations with talent, what are you seeing around flexible and remote working?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big sort of stat that really stands out to me is this 82%, of people saying that, they're not going to accept a job where 5 days in the office is mandatory. And I think it's worth us taking a moment to really reflect on how different that appears and seems from a pre-pandemic sort of time, because we know that the 5 days was very much the norm before. So I think that's a real big pivot, and it's almost, what's the famous saying that necessity is the mother of all invention, right? So we are starting to see, I think, an increasing proportion of talent now sort of really asking quite upfront, what is the split? It's often quite, one of the sort of the first questions that we tend to get. I'm just going to take a few moments, Alex. There's a question point come through here from James Rendell, who's one of our former employees. So hi, James, and thanks for joining. But yeah, you're dead right to point out that a lot of the survey data is actually ran at the earlier part of sort of 2022. Do we think that respondents might have changed their view on what's the most important, i.e. salary total reward, given sort of the cost of living crisis? I'd say that we've obviously continuing to have discussions with talent that were resourcing and finding for Ocean clients. My personal view, and I'll let Claire and the others sort of talk in a second, is that the flexibility, the well-being point is still coming out as a number one priority. I think within our industry as well, I mean, we're fairly, I mean, this is probably quite a controversial thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. But we're a fairly sort of, recession-proof industry. We're generally made up of people that are more highly remunerated than other industries. One of the most highly remunerated industries that there is, of course, financial services. So, I do think slightly less of a point in terms of total reward. And I do still believe that people are far more interested in what's going to be my experience of work, when am I going to be in work, where can I work, how can I work, etc. So I think that would be my sort of personal view on that. But maybe Claire, have you got any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I do. And I think just to sort of reflect in terms of what we're seeing with candidates currently, I would really say that in actual fact, salary is important, but really the flexibility of work is the primary question. The total reward is a factor, but it's not the driving factor. The driving factor is absolutely around that flexible working, hybrid. How often am I required to be in the office? When should I be in the office? Can I dictate what that is, rather than how much I'm going to be paid? I think around the inflationary piece, it is important. And people are noting that with the inflation hikes that we're seeing and potential sort of future looking at those, it's something people are considering when they're looking at that monetary move, but it's not the deciding factor. Really is the hybrid piece is still one of the most important things that we're being asked as recruiters.
Yeah, and just on that sort of point, Claire, is there anything that you're sort of seeing from Ocean's client organizations around hybrid working that is making those organizations stand out, or anything that you're seeing that is particularly effective in terms of attracting the attention of potential talent?
Yeah, it's a slightly tricky one, because I think ultimately we're finding that there is other factors, but I think ultimately what we're seeing is still the flexibility of work. I think that's still the priority, and I think that ability to work for an organisation that does give them other, so rather than monetary reasons that they're going to be joining an organisation, or the name. So historically we would see particular organisations had a reputation for just their name alone, that people wanted to work for those organisations. We're seeing that less impactful. We've got a number of, we're very fortunate at Ocean that we do work with reputable clients, and we have a number of organisations that are fantastic brand, organisation names, but actually if they don't give the flexibility that those individuals are looking for, they still aren't willing to consider working for those companies, and it is a lesser factor.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, maybe I can build on that sort of a little bit. I mean, certainly from what I'm sort of seeing, there's been varied approach. We've got some organisations at one end of the spectrum saying that we want people back in the office 4 or 5 days. We've got others at the other end of the spectrum that are saying, well, actually, you can choose where you want to work. It's a personal choice, which I think mirrors the one of the data points that you can see on sort of the screen in front of you. And then we're sort of seeing, organisations in the middle. We've seen a few clients that are moving down the line of sort of categorising certain roles and functions with a name, and depending on which sort of category they belong to, they're in the office 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. So accordingly, or some roles are just completely remote. But there's a lot of actual quite deliberate conversation and thinking going into understanding what the team needs and what the business needs. One of the other interesting dynamics, and I think we're going to talk about this in a second, is actually the views of talent and actually what they're coming into the office for. And I think that's also really important as well. I'm just going to pause there, and let's bring sort of Cara in. But Cara, any sort of views from you on what you're seeing, in terms of good practice from client organisations when it comes to hybrid working?
Yeah, I think that the landscape has changed massively for organisations within financial services, and pre-pandemic, obviously, that has changed massively. In terms of working practices in terms of hybrid working, we are seeing a lot of counter offers. We are seeing organizations losing out to that talent based on flexibility. So for example, I can give you an example. I mean, I speak to candidates every day. I spoke to one this morning that has actually recently turned down 2 offers based on the fact that they want them in the office 5 days a week. Great candidate, great skills, you know, very, very experienced within the operations market. And ultimately, organizations have missed out on her talent based on that factor.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. And talent is I think, you know, that these questions around flexibility and working would typically happen, you know, latter stage of the recruitment process, right? Whereas actually now we're getting these questions, you know, sort of straight up front. And, you know, all candidates are sort of, you know, assessing whether they continue in the conversation or actually whether they draw a line now, because they know actually if you're going to ask me to be in any more than X amount of time throughout the week, that actually this is not something that's right for me. So I think you're absolutely right to sort of spotlight that talent is being as brutal as that, you know, when it comes to deciding on talking to organisations in particular roles. Laura, I just wondered whether we can come to you, just to any thoughts on what Cara said, or anything else that you want to add around this sort of flexibility and hybrid working point.
Yeah, definitely. So I think...
Hold the line 1 second for me. We've got a little bit of interference. Let's try again.
Yeah, so agreeing with Cara for sure. Hybrid working, I feel, is definitely important for a lot of people. A good example at the moment, I'm working with a client that are looking for people to be in the office 5 days a week. I've got a fantastic candidate, which I think would be absolutely perfect for the role, but she's a working mum, so she is looking for hybrid working. So yeah, I'm not sure if sort of anyone else is seeing that as well. Returners, I think, is what I'm seeing a lot. Also, I think personally, I think in terms of benefits, just slightly moving on from that, I do think well-being is quite important. From my experience, there is a bit of stigma around mental health. So I do feel like, think if, you know, well-being is, you know, part of benefits, it just opens that conversation about mental health, which I think we're all trying to do outside of work anyway. Mental health is a big thing. I think if we can open up that conversation within the workplace, you know, I think it's important for people that do suffer with mental health, because they do feel like they're getting supported by that. So yeah, that's sort of things that I've been seeing at the moment. Yeah,
I think that the point you make around you know, mental health, well-being, you know, candidates are definitely interested in what well-being programs look like. And I think, you know, one of the reasons for that is that there's obviously been much more focus on mental health issues over the last few years. I think, you know, people have obviously experienced difficult times as well with the pandemic and all of the after effects of mental health as well. And I think it's really important that, you know, line managers, organizations can normalize the conversation about well-being in a potential interview situation. And of course, there's a very fine line between going into a very, you know, deliberate conversation about mental health. But one of the questions that I really like to see line managers ask is, you know, what environment and what teams have you really performed at your best? What does good look like to you? And actually, maybe the line manager also offering some, you know, some insight into, you know, some of the types of working practices and arrangements which work in the team or indeed within the organization. So I think getting that conversation happening with empathy, I think is really important. Cara, I know you're keen to sort of look at or answer one of James's questions. So just for the people on the line. So the question is, organizations including GS or Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, JP Morgan have recently made announcements calling all employees back into the office over the last few months. Have we seen any candidates sort of passing views on that, disagreeing with that, not looking at their organisations based on those sort of messages? So, Cara, do you want to answer that one?
Yes. Okay, so I would say that in terms of candidates that we have spoken to, I would say that there are some that do disagree. Again, it really does depend on their requirements as well. ultimately, we're here to accurately match the client's requirements, but then also the candidates as well. And I think that what we found is that some, yes, have disagreed with this. And again, back to my first point, have taken offers elsewhere based around flexibility. However, I think as well that we do have the understanding from some candidates that, to work for a top tier client, to work within this industry, they are high volume environments. They are required to ultimately be in the office to learn. And what we do see is those candidates that are hungry for it will actually commit to that. But it's definitely limited the pool of candidates that we can kind of go to in order to ultimately place these types of positions.
Yeah, really good points. I think there's definitely going to be those candidates, right, that that's not a good signal, being in the office all the time, or mandating the frequency in which sort of people in. I think my personal view on that is that it's quite a hard line. If you look at the data points here around personal choice, employees should be able to decide when they work in the office, and that should be a personal choice. I mean, I think that is logistically and operationally very difficult for employers and for organisations, and I don't think that is the right way to work. I think it needs to be a conversation with the person and the line manager and the organisation around what works best for them, and of course there has to be an element in some instances of compromise in personal arrangements and what works, but I think that it's how we get this balance, and I think that really takes confidence from a line manager perspective in terms of how to have that conversation, what questions do we ask to get to the place. Claire, you recruit a lot for BlackRock and Goldman Sachs, so I think it would be good actually to get your views and actually what you're seeing off the back of that question as well.
Yeah, I think just to really sort of cover the point, I think it's a really valid one. I mean, Goldman Sachs have been open in publishing that they are looking for people to return 5 days a week, and it's non-negotiable. There's been a lot of organisations, including BlackRock, that are outlining that they must have 3 days present in the office, but actually the days in which they work, they're flexible depending on the team, the landscape, etc. I think the challenge that we have and what we're seeing from candidates on the other side of the fence is how are we then able to bring underrepresented talent to the shortlist of those clients if that's what their stipulation is. We know that organisations, like a Goldman, want greater diversity within the business, and they do have a truly diverse representation, but what we can't bring them is other underrepresented groups, return to work mums, part-time working people with caring responsibilities, whoever they may be, can't commit to 5 days in the office. They've seen the last 2 years that flexible hybrid working, and organisations are still showing and demonstrating profit over and above year on year during pandemic. So it's quite interesting, and those workforces have either been 100% work from home or partially work from home. So the stance is quite a difficult one for us to navigate, and certainly with candidates, their preference is not for that. So that there is certain underrepresented groups that just can't commit to 5 days a week that will not be considered, whether that's to move into the industry or to stay in the industry for those organisations.
Yeah, really strong points. And I think what I got from that is that organisations that can't embrace hybrid or flexible working, or provide that level of flexibility that talent is looking for, is going to miss out potentially on attracting talent from underrepresented groups. So it's kind of a conflict, isn't it, with a strong message of we want to hire more talent from underrepresented backgrounds, and we want to have more return to work folks. We want to have people coming back off maternity leave. We potentially want to tap talent from neurodiverse backgrounds, talent maybe that's experiencing mental health issues that need more flexibility in terms of working patterns. So I think it's a really important one, isn't it? And it's quite paradoxical, I think, that and Goldman's and BlackRock are clients of our business on sort of both sides of what we do, and we know from those organisations a very strong message of diversity, equity, inclusion, some really standout best practices as well across the industry. But actually, how's that then sort of filtering down on the ground with talent attraction? I think it's a really important point. Let's move on to the next slide, Alex, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Time.
I think this is a good transition really, because we've been talking here about some of the challenges around implementing a 5-day mandatory attendance in the office, and the more talent are saying, at least from what we've seen, is that collaboration with my team is the primary reason that talent view it necessary to go back into the office. So just reflecting on, if you do need to implement a 5-day mandatory working week in the office, then the focus here should be on demonstrating the reason for that being something around collaboration, being around meeting clients, being around training and personal development, because those are things that we've seen time and time again do work best when you are together in the same room, where possible, of course. So, I think there is a correlation here in terms of success between having a 5-day mandated working in the office, but with a focus on collaboration, personal development and training. So, you have to, I think the take home for me is that justification for in office mandates is really important here, and navigating that as an organization is obviously very challenging, but having a sense that this is still the main focus, I think, is helpful. 12% of respondents stated that having personal plans outside of work was a key reason for them to come into the office. So I think there's definitely a personal element here, a social element, and I don't think we should underestimate the importance of social aspects in working culture, particularly around collaboration. Coming together for a working lunch or working breakfast, etc., can be a really important aspect to boost morale and to build team dynamics, etc. The other thing we've seen, and one of the questions we asked, is, what would likely make you accept a role? 4-day working week with no salary cut, that was pretty strongly represented. The option to choose which days I come in, again, well represented. The option to work remotely all the time, slightly less well represented, but still a strong impact factor. And then the option to work in different office locations. This is a very interesting one, I think, particularly around if we say, okay, we've mandated 5 days in the office, but that could be across a wider geographical space. If you have regional offices enabling teams to be able to work regionally or to move around, could be one way to mitigate that factor a little bit. And so some quite interesting aspects here. What is very clear, though, is that all 4 of these had a positive correlation on responses that said, yes, I would be more likely to accept a role. So we can, of course, explore the practicalities of implementation here, but the fundamental is that these aspects are impacting candidates' decision making. Matt, do you want to jump in with anything here? Because I know that this is something that you've seen yourself and have thoughts on.
Yeah, I mean, the stat that I'm drawn to on this page is the 22%. So respondents would be more likely to accept a job that was fully remote. I actually thought that number would be higher. I thought there'd be more talent that would want to work completely remotely. So I'm quite surprised that number wasn't higher. I think what I also get out of this this page as well is that how important the reason is for bringing team members into the office. So what we're seeing is that we want to see our colleagues, we want to see our managers, we want to see the people around us, we want to collaborate. So I think that's really important. So one of the things that's actually worked very well in our business is that we have gone from being, an organization that was 5 days in the office to an organization now that is generally in the office 1 to 2 days per week. But actually, when we are in the office, we're not coming in to do our emails or work on our independent work. We're actually coming in to work on problems, challenges, client requirements together. And giving people that experience of collaborating. So I think how we facilitate that and facilitating those environments actually is definitely a skill. And I think it's one that is lacking generally across the industry sector. So I think how we can encourage that and empower line managers with the skills that they need to create those collaborative environments and make that happen more deliberately than it did before, I think is really important. I just want to quickly come to Laura, Alex, if that's okay, just to see if you've got anything, Laura, that you wanted to add on to here. I know you've been doing a lot of work in sort of the mental health space and talking to candidates, around their well-being, etc. But anything that you just want to add in terms of this point around hybrid, remote working, and maybe the access that this could provide to what is an untapped talent pool?
Yeah, I think possibly picking up from what you were saying as well. Obviously, mental health is vast. You have depression, you have anxiety, the list, kind of goes on. And I think it's very specific. It's not like one size fits all. And I think for some people that may suffer with anxiety, like my sister, she suffers with it quite a lot. Working from home is quite important to her. And she does tend to work best, when she's at home. So I think, just sort of off the back of what you said as well. And it really depends on the person. Like I said, mental health it's not one size fits all at all. So I think it's important that we all educate ourselves, especially in employers, because so many people suffer with it, and like I mentioned previously, it is a big stigma. I've never talked about my mental health in the workplace, but I'm doing it today. So it just shows, if you've got the right employers and you feel safe, it's a safe space so you can have these conversations, whether it's I'm not feeling that great today, or working from home is helping for me today because I've got a bit of anxiety. It's so important, because I've never ever, like I said, it's a big stigma. I've never spoken about this, and I was thinking, I was like, oh, should I do that, should I not? But I think depends on your environment, and it's given me the confidence, I guess, to discuss it today. So
well, I mean, we were delighted that you've been really open with your your own struggles as well, and we want to create that environment, right, where we all talk about that. And I certainly talk about my own battles with mental health as well. We all have a mental health, and where we are on that spectrum depends on what we've got going on in our lives right now, right? So, and this is no different for talent, of course. So again, how we can get more of these conversations happening in recruitment, how do we look after each other as a team? Things like this, I think, can be really sort of impactful. I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to pass back over to Alex just to sort of push through the final slide here, and wrap up today's conversation.
Thanks, team. Yeah, I think two final reflections from me, really, just to bring the study to a close from what we saw directly from talent, was providing flexibility and empowerment to talent, and letting candidates, letting new hires dictate, or at least set the tone for you in what helps them to be successful. Just building, I think, on what the team have said today. In a lot of the work that LGBT Great does, we talk a lot around psychological safety at work and how to improve the environment from a psychological safety point of view for LGBT plus talent. And one of the things that we always say, and I think is very pertinent here, is that studies have shown that there is a positive correlation between improved psychological safety at work. So the feeling of bringing your whole self to work, being able to be yourself unashamedly at work, and to invest all of your emotional energy, your emotional toil into your workload, rather than to unnecessary things about worrying about how am I coming across, my identity, etc. The same is true of mental health. If I have the mechanisms to express and my struggles, to gain support, then that has a positive correlation with productivity. And what do we know? That productivity, if it's improved, has a positive correlation on the bottom line. So there's a direct line here between improved psychological safety and improved bottom lines. We did see that a little bit through COVID. I think people felt that they were able to work in a better way, all of the issues with COVID notwithstanding, of course. But many organizations experienced a good jump in productivity, demonstrably, during COVID, and that this obviously has a direct relationship with the bottom line. So recentering these conversations on people, on the human element, I think is really important. And overall, that is what talent are expecting, is that the organizations have become a bit more human because of COVID, and because nothing like shared trauma to bring a community together, right? So I think organizations definitely have a bit of a mandate here to walk the walk in terms of expressing how human-centered they are, how that roles do have flexibility within them to accommodate for the changeable needs, the variable needs of a diverse employer base. Particularly we've mentioned briefly returning to work post-pregnancy, for example. That's a very important thing. Having the space to be flexible here is only going to benefit those employees. And if they can bring more of themselves to work, they can invest more of that energy into working, and then ultimately the organization sees the benefit here. So recentering on the human factor actually has a positive impact on the organizational factor. So this is things that candidates are aware of. So I think having a sense of this is really important.
Alex,
yes, fire away.
I wanted to just add on what you said. I think
Please.
that really important. Myself, as a return to work, I've recently returned to work in the last couple of years, and having kind of gone through a pregnancy, been on maternity leave, it's definitely was a requirement of mine to be able to find an organization that had that flexibility for me, and just being able to kind of get to grips with those dynamics of being a working mum, working within this type of industry. It was pretty much unheard of, you coming in and working part-time, and it is very uncommon to see part-time roles within this industry. So I mean, for myself, I have kind of proved that working practices do work. I currently work 3.5 days a week, which fits in very, very well with my juggling mum and work lifestyle. But also, speaking to those candidates, I'm able to listen to them and also resonate with them. And ultimately, I'm a true believer that it can work. And if we're able to see this more across the industry, we'll definitely be able to attract, more talent, offering kind of, if organizations are able to offer that part-time offering us.
Thanks, Cara. I completely agree, and it's really encouraging to hear you say that was something you were looking for, and it's something that you ended up obviously finding here. So I think it's really good, and having you as well be able to talk about that so candidly, as I know you do with candidates, is really powerful, and I know that the team here are very committed to taking those perspectives to hiring managers as well. So I think the recruitment industry is as a conduit for this change is really, really powerful. But yeah, no, they're really good to hear. I'll just end, and then I'll stop speaking and let everyone else share their final thoughts. Just 5 questions that we had that we would like, we think that hiring managers should consider when moving forward with this. The first is that how can you approach flexible conversations with impact? Do you have a sense of how you can do that in your own organization? Are you demonstrating authentic connection to well-being and well-being conversations throughout the recruitment process, throughout the interview process? Are you making clear, overt statements to the well-being, areas that you're able to influence and support for future talent? Are you actively seeking to create better safe spaces for talent during the interview process, with hybrid options, with in-person, with open and overt discussions about underrepresentation, about diversity, about mental health? Are you tackling these head on? What ways can you leverage technology to inspire and engage here? How can you walk the walk technologically speaking? Are you having that visible externally facing social media campaign to really demonstrate how that well-being piece is being explored throughout the organization? And then finally, are you thinking about what talent are seeking? Are you exploring what your target audience are thinking right now? Leveraging reports like this and conversations with organizations like Ocean is really critical in maintaining a finger on that pulse. But yeah, I suppose that's kind of everything from me, and that's a brief summary of what the report outlines. Claire, I think it'd probably be, if I can come to you now, just for a bit of a wrap up of what it is that you've learned from this piece of research, and what your key takeouts are.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I think ultimately we set out at the Ocean Partnership to really understand how talent is experienced sort of post-pandemic, and really how the job market and how expectations have changed, hence the research, hence the white paper. I think what is really clear to us on the findings is the talent trends we saw pre-pandemic, and then particularly the expectations around more competitive reward packages, around upward mobility, travel opportunities. All those things haven't disappeared. They're still here, they've increased. But really, it's making sure and understanding that in this new world that talent is emerging, has a more vocal place. It's very determined in the expectations of what it's looking for, and much more focused on, yes, the other points are important, but actually it's really important to them to understand that flexibility, that hybrid, and really, humanizing the recruitment process is one of the key new ways, that organizations can get ahead. I think it really, for us, it's understanding that hiring community and making sure we're listening to those. It's a competitive talent space, and really to bring that underrepresented talent to the organizations. It's looking at, normalizing mental health discussions, empowering the employees to decide, leading with inclusion and diversity, because ultimately, that will follow. And I think it's really just making sure that we're evolving as the industry is evolving, and listening to those in the community.
Great points. Thank you, Claire. No, really, really good. I think that this idea of walking the walk is really, really interesting to me. Talking the talk, where's the comms plan? Where's the internal external comms plan? And then do you have the things to back it up? I think it's really interesting. Team, any other final reflections? Laura, Matt, Cara, anything you wanted to share with everyone on the call today before we open out to any questions?
No, all good. Thanks.
Anything from me?
Amazing. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We do have a couple of minutes now, just in case there are any outstanding questions that you wanted to share. Please do drop those in the comment box or the Q&A box. And just while I'm giving you a set time to do that, I'd like to just run one final poll, if I may, just around what it is that you would like to see next from the Ocean Partnership. So we have here a few options. Which of the following would you like to see more of from the Ocean Partnership? Please just select as many that you think would be relevant to you. So more candidate insights, more organizational insights, more hiring manager insights, what a hiring manager is saying, recruitment industry news and updates, and then deep dives into inclusive recruitment practices, which is something that I know on the LGBT Great side, we've been exploring a little bit from an LGBT lens aspect. And while you're doing that as well, if you do have any questions, please do drop those, and then we will cover them off either now or after the fact. The report will, after this call, be available, and I'll try and see if I can get a copy sent to everyone who's joined today. The recording will also be made available should you wish to share it, or should you wish to go back and listen to anything that we had to say in a bit more detail. Great. I don't think there's anything else from me. I'll just give you all 30 seconds more on the poll, and then we can wrap up. Matt.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, just while you're sort of finishing off your answers there to the poll questions, just in terms of next steps, obviously we will share a copy of this recording to anybody that wants to share it internally on an email after this. If there's any questions or queries that come off the back of this as well, or any issues that you would like to talk about in more detail, please do get in touch with us. You can email us at info@theoceanpartnership.com or info@lgbtgreat.com as well. But I just thank you on behalf of all of our team for joining today, and we hope you found this useful.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, just echo it. And all of our emails, if you want to get in touch with any of us directly, are just our first name at theoceanpartnership.com or at lgbtgreat.com. Briefly, just on the what next. So it seems like deep diving into recruitment and inclusive practices is something that is resonating. So team, I definitely think we should have a conversation around how we can get some good insights around that for everyone. And then also candidate insight, everything really. So good to see that there's lots more things we can be doing, and that this is something that everyone on the call would appreciate. So hopefully this is the start of a lot more of these sessions in the future. And if you do have any questions, thoughts or comments or feedback, and you'd like to get in touch directly, please do so after the fact. And yeah, all I can say is I wish you all a great rest of the week, and thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.